Have you ever had that strange feeling when looking in the rearview mirror, as if, for a second, there was something there, something that shouldn't be? Imagine driving alone on a deserted road and suddenly realizing you're no longer alone. Get ready for a story that will make you think twice before looking in the rearview mirror at night. Before we start, I want to know, where are you watching this video from? Comment below. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button, because that helps me continue bringing more terrifying stories to you. Here is the first part of the story based on the title, The Clown in the Rearview Mirror on a Texas Road. Highway 281 cut through Texas like a forgotten scar, a cracked asphalt that seemed to never end. The hot midnight wind blew fine sand over the road, and the headlights of Brian's truck barely illuminated a few meters ahead. He was exhausted, returning from a delivery in Laredo, and just wanted to get home. The radio crackled with a distant country tune, and his heavy eyes threatened to close. He rubbed his face with his free hand and looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing but endless darkness and the faded silhouette of bushes along the roadside. He sighed and turned back to the road when laughter echoed in the silence. He stiffened, looking around. Nothing. The radio continued its melody, but something was wrong. The laughter didn't come from there. A chill ran up his spine as he looked back at the rearview mirror. In the back seat, illuminated only by the intermittent glow of distant streetlights, was a clown. The white paint was cracked like dried skin, and the eyes, two black holes, stared at him unblinkingly. The red smile stretched impossibly wide, and the laughter started again, low and scratchy, like a scratched record playing in the back of his mind. Brian held his breath and turned his body suddenly, ready to react. The back seat was empty. His heart pounded in his chest, his throat dry. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe the road was playing tricks on him. But when he looked back at the mirror, the clown was there again, closer. This time the clown tilted his head, teeth appearing between cracked lips, and whispered something Brian couldn't understand. The trucker swallowed hard and gripped the steering wheel. "This is a dream," he murmured to himself. His foot pressed the accelerator, and the engine groaned in protest as the truck surpassed 120 kilometers per hour. The streetlights along the road began to flicker, blinking like dying bulbs. With each new flash, the clown appeared closer in. The mirror. First, just the face, then the shoulders. Now, he was almost beside Brian, as if sitting in the passenger seat. A rotten smell filled the air, iron and decaying flesh. Brian coughed, his eyes watering. The laughter now turned into a chorus of overlapping voices, buzzing inside his head like a swarm of flies. Panic gripped him as the clown raised his hand and touched Brian's shoulder with a long, thin finger. The touch burned like ice. Screaming, Brian yanked the steering wheel and the truck skidded on the road. The tires screeched and the vehicle almost veered off the highway. He struggled to regain control, his breath coming in gasps. Sweat dripped down his forehead. When he finally managed to stabilize the truck, silence returned. The passenger seat was empty. The smell had vanished. The road stretched ahead, infinite and desolate. Brian laughed, a nervous and unstable laugh. "Just fatigue," he murmured, forcing himself to believe. But when he looked at the rearview mirror one last time, something made his stomach churn. In the dust accumulated on the rear window, a message had been written with fingers smeared in dried blood. "See you at the next light." Brian felt his spine freeze as he read those words. His chest rose and fell in short breaths, while his mind struggled to process what was happening. He didn't want to look at the mirror again, but his morbid curiosity was stronger. The glass now seemed clean, as if nothing had been written there. The road remained empty, with no other cars in sight. The truck's engine roared loudly in the suffocating Texas midnight. Brian looked around, trying to find any sign of civilization. Then, in the distance, a solitary headlight blinked in the darkness. He swallowed hard. Was it just a regular street light, or was it the light from the message? Each passing second brought him closer to that light, and his heart beat faster. He could simply veer off, take a side road, and forget this madness. But something inside him said it wouldn't make a difference. Fate was already sealed. The headlight blinked again, and Brian noticed something underneath it. A car parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights on. He slowed down and tried to see better. It was a dark sedan with the driver's door slightly open. Was someone there? An accident? Brian's instincts screamed to keep going, but he also knew that ignoring someone in trouble could be a fatal mistake. Taking a deep breath, he stopped the truck a few meters behind the car and turned on the high beams. The beam of light illuminated the empty road. Nothing moved. He got out of the vehicle hesitantly, his knees shaking. "Hey, anyone there?" His voice echoed in the vastness of the night. No response. Just the muffled sound of crickets and the hot wind blowing across the asphalt. As he approached the sedan, he smelled something strange in the air. It wasn't gasoline or burned rubber. It was something organic. A smell of rotten meat and cold sweat. The driver's door slowly opened, creaking like an old gate. Brian held his breath and peeked inside the car. The seat was empty, but in the rearview mirror he saw a face. The clown. Brian jumped back, stumbling backward. The sedan suddenly started to vibrate as if something was moving inside. The windows fogged up, and hands began to appear on the glass, dozens of them, as if something was trying to escape from within. Laughter filled the air, coming from all directions at once. Brian ran back to his truck, his heart pounding in his chest. When he slammed the door and started the engine, one last look in the rearview mirror made his blood run cold. The clown was now outside the sedan, standing in the middle of the road. He didn't move. He just smiled. The smile was too wide, the pointed teeth reflecting the faint light of the headlight. Brian didn't wait to find out more. With a scream caught in his throat, he floored the accelerator. The truck sped off, leaving the grotesque scene behind. But before the darkness swallowed everything again, he saw in the rearview mirror the clown was still there, and he was waving at Brian. The speedometer read almost 93.2 miles per hour, but it wasn't fast enough. Brian kept his eyes fixed on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The headlight and the sedan were now just a blur in the past, but fear still crawled over his skin like a hungry insect. He didn't want to look at the rearview mirror again. The clown could be there, watching, waiting. But the sick curiosity was a curse. Slowly, he glanced at the glass. Nothing. Just the empty back seat and the darkness of the road behind him. Brian let out a shaky sigh. Maybe he was going crazy. Maybe it was just fatigue, mixed with too much coffee and too many sleepless nights. But then, a whisper echoed through the interior of the truck. "Why are you running, Brian?" The cold that gripped his body was so intense. It seemed to drain all the heat from the Texas night. The sound didn't come from the radio. It didn't come from outside. It came from the back seat. His fingers trembled as he adjusted the rearview mirror to see better. Nothing, just the dark leather of the seat. But the feeling that something was there was overwhelming. He forced a laugh, a rough and strained sound that died quickly. "This is just in my head," he murmured. The radio exploded with static. The speakers screeched so loudly that Brian screamed and covered his ears. A distorted sound, like a VHS tape playing in reverse, filled the truck. Amid the cacophony, the clown's voice whispered again, scratchy and cutting, "I'm not in the back seat, Brian." The sound abruptly stopped. The silence was even worse. Brian looked forward, and the blood drained from his face. The clown was sitting in the passenger seat, cracked paint, eyes dark like bottomless pits, the sharp smile that seemed to extend beyond the skin itself. But the worst part was the way he leaned toward Brian, so close they could almost touch. "Now we can talk," Brian screamed. His vision blurred for a moment, and he yanked the steering wheel so hard that the truck veered off the road. The vehicle skidded on the dry dirt, the tires kicking up dust as he struggled to regain control. When he finally managed to stop, breathing like a cornered animal, he looked at the passenger seat, empty. His heart pounded erratically, his mind spinning in panic. He opened the door, stumbling out, sweat dripping down his forehead. The road was an infinite blackness, no sound, no sign of life. Then a click. Brian turned slowly. The passenger door of the truck was open. He knew he hadn't opened it. The clown wanted him to know he was still there. He never left. Brian stumbled backward, his eyes fixed on the wide-open passenger door. The hot desert wind blew, kicking up dust that danced in the faint light of the headlights. The truck now seemed like a fragile cocoon, a useless shelter against whatever was out there with him. His instinct screamed for him to run. But run where? There were no nearby towns, no gas stations, no houses, just miles of darkness and the rustling of dry bushes around him. He was trapped. The sound of something scraping against the asphalt made his stomach churn. It was an uneven noise, like nails scratching stone. Brian forced himself to look at the road, and that's when he saw it. A mist began to form over the asphalt, dense and opaque, something that shouldn't exist in the suffocating Texas heat. It moved erratically, snaking along the ground like spectral fingers. In the middle of it, a silhouette took shape. The clown. He was no longer smiling. His face was still empty, devoid of emotion, but his eyes, those black, bottomless eyes, were fixed on Brian, studying him, waiting for his reaction. "Why don't you get back in the car, Brian?" The voice came from all directions, as if the desert itself was whispering. Brian took another step back. His foot found a loose piece of rock, and he tripped, falling backward onto the hard ground. Dust filled his mouth and nose, and he coughed as he tried to get up. But when he lifted his head again, the mist already surrounded him. The air turned cold. He smelled the rotten odor again, that mix of spoiled meat and old sweat. The feeling of a presence around him was unbearable, and then fingers touched his throat, cold, long, impossibly thin. Brian tried to scream, but the sound died before it could escape. His body became paralyzed, as if something was draining his strength. The clown leaned over him, teeth appearing in a broken smile. "I can feel your fear." The fingers tightened a little more. The world around Brian began to spin. His eyelids grew heavy. He was passing out, or something was pulling his consciousness elsewhere. A place where there was no light. In the last second before everything went dark, he heard the laughter, loud, deafening, filling every corner of his mind. And then, nothing. Just silence. If you've made it this far, it's because this story has you hooked. But I want to know, what do you think so far? Comment below and tell me if you've ever experienced anything strange on the road. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. That way, you won't miss any scary stories like this one. Brian's consciousness returned gradually, but something was off. The rotten smell had disappeared. The hot Texas wind blew again, and the distant hum of an engine filled his ears. His eyes opened. He was behind the wheel. His heart nearly jumped out of his chest when he realized he was driving his truck down the deserted road as if nothing had happened. The speedometer read 100 kilometers per hour, and the dashboard lights glowed softly in the dark. He blinked several times, trying to understand. The parked sedan, the clown in the mist, those hands on his throat. It all seemed like a bad dream. But his throat ached, as if something had really squeezed it. Swallowing hard, Brian looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just the empty road stretching behind him. Maybe he had hallucinated. The lack of sleep, the extreme fatigue. That could explain everything. But then something changed. Brian's eyes returned to the road ahead. He saw a detail that made him shiver. The headlight. The same solitary headlight where he had stopped before, but that was impossible. He hadn't made any turns, hadn't turned around. He should have been moving forward, away from that place. But there it was again, the headlight blinking slowly. The same dark sedan on the shoulder, flashing its hazard lights. "This can't be," Brian murmured. Feeling panic rise within him, he gripped the steering wheel and pressed the accelerator to the floor. The truck roared, the speed increasing. 100, 110, 120. The headlight was approaching. Too fast, but he refused to stop. This time, he was going to get past it. But when his truck's headlights illuminated the sedan, something made him scream. The driver's door was open, and someone was sitting in the seat. The clown. He wasn't smiling. This time, his empty eyes met Brian's, and his mouth began to move, forming silent words. Brian yanked the steering wheel violently, trying to swerve, but everything spun out of control. The world became a blur of light and darkness. The truck spun on the road, the tires screeching against the asphalt. A violent impact shook his body, and then there was silence. He didn't know how long he lay there, slumped against the steering wheel, the smell of gasoline and smoke filling his nostrils. His limbs trembled. His head throbbed. With difficulty, he lifted his eyes to the rearview mirror and saw the clown sitting in the back seat. This time, he was laughing. Brian tried to scream, but his body wouldn't respond. Blood trickled down his forehead, mixing with the cold sweat that soaked his skin. His breath came in ragged gasps, and every fiber of his being begged him not to look again. But he did. The clown was there, sitting calmly in the back seat, hands folded in his lap, as if they were just two passengers sharing a casual ride. The faint light of the dashboard reflected off the sharp teeth, and his black, bottomless eyes were like two holes carved into reality. "You're going the wrong way, Brian." The voice came low, almost gentle, but there was something in it, a distorted reverberation that made his stomach churn. Brian swallowed hard, struggling to find any logic in what was happening. Had the car flipped? Was he dead? In a coma? His chest rose and fell frantically, trying to grasp any rational explanation. "You still don't get it, do you?" The clown tilted his head, the smile growing. "There's nowhere to run. You're already here." "Where?" Brian finally found his voice, hoarse and broken. The clown blinked slowly. Then he raised a hand and pointed to the rearview mirror. Brian felt an unbearable cold grip his spine when he saw what was reflected there. It wasn't just the clown. The back seat was crowded, multiple figures crammed into the seat, writhing, merging into each other. Pale faces, mutilated bodies, mouths open in silent screams. Men, women, children, all with black, empty eyes, all trapped in the mirror, and among them Brian saw himself. His own black eyes stared back at him. His mouth moved soundlessly as if trying to warn him of something. But it was too late. The clown stepped forward, his hand now resting lightly on Brian's shoulder. "It's always the mirror that shows the truth." The touch burned like ice. His vision darkened, the world spinning around him. The clown leaned in, whispering something in his ear before everything disappeared. "Welcome to the endless road." And then Brian woke up, in the truck, driving on the same deserted road, and in the rearview mirror the headlight blinked ahead. The dark sedan on the shoulder, exactly like before. The road had restarted, and Brian knew, deep in his soul, that he would never leave. Brian's desperation took the form of a stifled scream. He turned the steering wheel, slammed on the brakes, did everything to stop the truck. But nothing changed. The road kept moving forward, the blinking headlight, the sedan on the shoulder. The clown, waiting. "No, no, no, no." Brian pounded the dashboard, his breath ragged, his chest burned, his eyes stung. He looked in the rearview mirror, praying not to see those figures again, but the mirror reflected only him, alone. For a moment, hope shimmered. Maybe it had been a nightmare. Maybe there was still a way out. The headlight blinked ahead. Brian kept his gaze fixed on the sedan as he approached. The car was there exactly as before, but something was different. This time, the driver's door was closed. Whatever was inside was waiting for him. His heart pounded in his chest. He knew that stopping was madness, but driving past and continuing. This infernal cycle, that was worse. Swallowing his fear, Brian pulled the truck onto the shoulder. The engine rumbled and silenced as he turned off the key. The silence that followed was absolute. Slowly, he got out of the car. Each step toward the sedan seemed to require superhuman strength. The wind stopped. The whole world seemed suspended, trapped in that moment. When he touched the handle of the sedan, a chill ran up his spine. Something was waiting inside. Something that wanted him to see. With a final breath, he opened the door. Inside the car, in the driver's seat, was himself. Brian, or a dead version of him, was sitting there, his head lolled to the side, his eyes open and glassy. His skin was pale, almost bluish, as if he'd been dead for hours. His hands rested on the steering wheel, but his mouth was slightly open, and a smile too wide, stretched his lips. Brian's stomach churned. This couldn't be real. That's when his dead self turned his head and looked directly at him. The eyes black as bottomless pits, the smile stretching even wider, and then Brian heard the voice. "Now you understand. You'll never leave here again." The clown's laughter echoed down the entire road, vibrating in reality itself. The world seemed to tear in half. The headlight blinked one last time, and everything went dark. Days later, highway patrol car pulled up next to the abandoned sedan on Highway 281. Two officers got out, frowning at the state of the vehicle. The engine was still warm, but there was no one there. "Call the tow truck," one of the officers said, "and see if you can find the driver." His partner looked around. The road was empty. There was no sign of anyone. He shrugged and went back to the car. But before getting in, his eyes passed over the rearview mirror of the sedan. And for a brief second, he thought he saw something. A face, cracked white paint, black eyes, an impossible smile. He blinked. The mirror was empty. The wind blew down the road, and, in the distance, a headlight blinked in the darkness. Could you sleep after this story? I really want to know what you thought of the ending. Comment below and let me know your opinion. And if you like this kind of content, you know what to do. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell. Because here, the horror never stops. See you next time, if you're still here.